Since May of 2018, one F-35 prime contractor had lost over 1 million spare parts, totaling $85 million, of which less than 2% had been reviewed by the F-35 Joint Program Office.
Strongly encourage Congress to never again approve a program that starts with a J, joint. That they become supersized, oversized, and totally unmanageable programs.
What would you say is the biggest reason for the decrease in small businesses contracting with the DoD?
Industrial base generally is saying it's the rules and regulations. From FY10 to FY20, the small businesses decreased by 43%.
This is like saying Voldemort.
We should avoid programs that are too big to fail at all costs.
Received $87 million in federal dollars to produce cell culture meat. Does the lab-grown meat contribute to the U.S. national security posture?
Probably not. It definitely should be something that's pursued by commercial or private industry. So instead of maybe having an air wing that's composed entirely of F-35s, we should have an air wing that's much more composed of uncrewed systems.
Put drones on there.
Drones on there.
Bingo!
Does the DoD still fund these psychological operations?
But those are designed, not to necessarily affect civilian populations. Those are designed as part of military operations to influence the thinking of your adversary.
We were watching movies like The Terminator. It's here.
I'm pleased to introduce our witnesses today. Mr. Moshe Schwartz is serving as an expert in defense acquisition and industrial base policy. Ms. MacKenzie Eaglen is a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, where she works on defense strategy, defense budgets, and military readiness. Next, we have Mr. Bryan Clark, Senior Fellow and Director for the Center of Defense Concepts and Technology at the Hudson Institute. And finally, Mr. Hedtler-Gaudette is the Director of Government Affairs at the Project on Government Oversight. A GAO study from May of last year found that since May of 2018, one F-35 prime contractor had lost over 1 million spare parts, totaling $85 million, of which less than 2% had been reviewed by the F-35 Joint Program Office. What do you believe can be done to increase accountability in this program? And to what degree is it just an attitude problem or an arrogance problem in Department of Defense?
There is a culture problem at the Defense Department. I would start, though, even sort of to the left of that, and strongly encourage Congress to never again approve a program that starts with a J, joint. That they become supersized, oversized, and totally unmanageable programs. It's basically 3 totally separate fighter jets under one umbrella, and it's led to many of the predictable and knowable problems that we have with this program today. So avoiding joint programs at all costs is one way to get at better oversight, more targeted accountability for these contractors. Something of the size and scope and magnitude of this program, it was, again, knowable. Holding contractors accountable as well comes from more direct and active management from the program managers and offices themselves.
Same GAO report found the Department of Defense has over 19,000 spare parts in the global spares pool that have been waiting between a few months to 5 years for disposition instruction from the F-35 Joint Program Office. Can you explain how the F-35 Joint Program Office would even get to the point of having 19,000 spares laying around? That's for you. Oh, Mr. Clark, I'm sorry, Mr. Clark.
Sure, yes, sir. I think part of the, clearly data analytics and IT systems that are managing these are a problem. The bigger problem is the role of the prime contractor in managing spare parts inventories. Right now, the contractor, Lockheed, is having to both use parts to be able to field new airplanes and field parts to be able to support existing airplanes that are out in the fleet. Because of that divergence of responsibilities, I think that's part of where you get this confusion about where parts are, because some are going to the factory, some are going to the field.
Can you talk a little bit more about how these conflicts of interest can weaken our oversight into some of the department's more troubled programs?
Sure, thank you. And I agree that members of Congress, as well as other officials in the government, including officials at the Department of Defense, holding direct financial stakes in defense companies is problematic at best. I mean, at the very least, it creates the appearance of potential corruption and the appearance of impropriety, even if there is no actual or real corruption or impropriety. It just looks really bad and feeds into an already pretty large and metastasizing feeling of lack of trust on the part of the public. And we don't want to make that any worse than it already is. But to be more precise in answering your question, I think it is just a truism that if your financial bottom line is tethered or tied to the performance of an individual company or an industry more broadly, there is a natural human inclination toward wanting to do what you can to increase your own financial standing.
What would you say is the biggest reason for the decrease in small businesses contracting with the DoD?
Thank you for that question. In the polls that I have seen, in the surveys that I have seen, the industrial base generally is saying it's the rules and regulations. Now, in my testimony, I said fewer regulations, but I agree with my colleague from Pogo, more consistently enforced. It is not about just getting rid of regulations, but we have a problem in the defense industrial base. From FY10 to FY20, the small businesses decreased by 43%. That is not my data. That is the government's data. It's not just small businesses. Other businesses, every other business, fell annually by 7.3%. That's an even higher percentage. Now, you can say that was only till 2020. It's happened every year since then. Last year, entire government contracting dropped by 2.2%, companies working with the government. So it is the regulations, it is the bureaucracy, and is not regulations just for regulations' sake. When I was at the 809 panel, we found regulations that required vending machines to accept dollar coins. We found regulations that required printers to print on two sides. We found contract clauses that required seatbelts to be put in the contract to wear seatbelts while driving on base, even though every state had that law already. It is that volume of work and that churn of regulation that small businesses cannot keep up with and know what the rules are.
And so my question for you in the macro sense is it time? Look, no one wants to say this. This is like saying Voldemort, right? But is this aircraft like, are we beyond the point of just throwing bad money after more bad money or good money? And at what point do we say, we've made a mistake here, it's time to move on? We like our aviators, these pilots, they're going to be non-proficient because the aircraft aren't capable of doing the job, or they're going to be non-proficient because they're not flying them, because we got to meet cost estimates. What the hell's the answer here?
So, Congressman, you're absolutely right. Those mission-capable rates are about half of what they should be. And if you look at other aircraft, older aircraft that are comparably employed, they would have much higher mission-capable rates. It's a much more complex airplane than I think anybody expected it to be. And the requirements they established for it set it up to fail in this way, because it's just so complex, it's so sophisticated, it's got so many potential failure modes that it creates a situation where when it gets out to the field, it's expensive to operate and maintain, and then beyond that, it has a lot more opportunities not to work. So we've set it up for failure in this way. The F-35 was supposed to be the bulk of the fleet. It was supposed to be the
thousands of
the
them
replacement for the F-16 and for basically your daily driver. It's no longer that way. We now have to treat it like a special aircraft that we employ for certain situations where we need stealth or sensor fusion or the capabilities it offers. And we're having to buy other aircraft to be the things that fly around the flagpole and do the general operations, the air superiority that we need, F-15EXs. The Navy was buying more F-18s for a while. We may find ourselves buying more F-16s. That's what happens is we end up with this high-low force or expensive, less expensive force in the aviation community just to fill out the air wings. But that's a situation that we set up by asking for this airplane to do too much in too short a time with technology that wasn't ready to measure up to those missions.
So in this case, F-35, it was the requirements. Too often the requirements are setting up for failure. For the CVN-78 with the Gerald Ford class, the cost was setting it up for failure. The cost estimate of the Navy was below 50%. You're going to have cost estimate, not because someone's doing something wrong, because your estimate is unrealistic. And I think to take a step back from this program, one thing to consider and one answer is let's re-examine how we're costing, how we're budgeting, how we're looking at requirements so we start right, because once you start wrong, you've already baked in problems.
Just quickly, we should avoid programs that are too big to fail at all costs. This was overly ambitious. This should have been 3 separate programs for the 3 separate aircraft.
Ms. Eaglen, did I say it right? Okay. This past February, a helicopter crash tragically claimed the lives of 5 Marines. One 23-year-old, Alec Langdon, was from my district in Chandler, Arizona. The CH-553E Super Stallion helicopter has been involved in fatal accidents since 1984. My question to you, if the DoD has not eliminated these critical issues after 40 years later, is this about oversight or is this about retirement for this craft?
Congressman Gosar, do you mean retirement early, meaning it's time to retire the aircraft?
Yes.
Yes, it is time, and that's why the CH-53K is under construction, and the service needs more of them now to replace these older frames. They're all across the services, hulls, airframes, and chassis of vehicles reach their limit, and you can patch them up and you can make them somewhat new and extend service lives, but there comes a point at which there is no more Band-Aids on top of Band-Aids.
Right. I hear you. The military has tested directed energy weapons since the 60s, but recent investments have skyrocketed. In FY24 alone, directed energy weapons received over $1.1 billion in appropriations. Can you describe to me what a directed energy weapon is? Is this like an EMP? Or Dr. Schwartz, you want to answer that?
Yeah, sure, Congressman. So directed energy can be either high power microwave, so a form of electromagnetic energy, or laser. So those are the two forms of directed energy that the DoD is pursuing right now. And they're both useful for shooting down drones, airplanes maybe, potentially cruise missiles, and they have been used to blind satellites as well, particularly lasers. So those are the two different ways that you can do it using directed energy.
Okay. A GAO report published May 25th, 2023 claims these weapons can be used to deny human entrance to a specific area. Is that true?
That's true. The active denial system that was pursued in the mid-2010s was designed to essentially heat up human skin, just like a microwave oven might, to force people to leave an area. That system was never fully fielded, so it was more of a research test object.
Could it be used on a fence?
It could be used on a fence, yes.
Okay. What other purposes do these DEs have?
So directed energy is mostly being pursued now to deal with the drone threat. So high power microwave in particular is really effective at taking down drones by disrupting their electronics, and it confuses the computer and forces it to reboot, or it causes the drone to land in response.
Mr. Clark, in October 2020, DoD press release revealed the Bio-Industrial Manufacturing and Design Ecosystem, or BioMADE, received $87 million in federal dollars to produce cell culture meat and protein products to reduce carbon emissions on military bases. Now, I'm a meat and potatoes guy. Based on your experience with the strategy and force planning from the Navy and the DoD, does the lab-grown meat contribute to the U.S. national security posture?
Probably not. It definitely should be something that's pursued by commercial or private industry.
Do you think the evolution, could you address the idea that with the evolution and improvement of drones and hypersonic missiles, does that have an effect on your equation?
Yeah, absolutely, but we should think about drones being employed from the carrier as well. The aircraft carriers are just a floating airport, and what's on the carrier is the most important element of it. So instead of maybe having an air wing that's composed entirely of F-35s, we should have an air wing that's much more composed of uncrewed systems.
Put drones on there.
Drones on there.
Bingo! Right. How many people are on an aircraft carrier if we want to go down?
5,000.
Right.
Pardon?
Right.
5,000.
That's what I thought. There's a lot of people.
Since World War I, the DoD has conducted psychological operations, or known as military information support operations. Mr. Clark, does the DoD still fund these psychological operations?
So DoD funds military information support operations, MISO, and under some new names now. But those are designed, not to necessarily affect civilian populations. Those are designed as part of military operations to influence the thinking of your adversary.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And last but not least, do you agree with me that war has changed, particularly this last kind of scene that these tanks that were really prized are now victims of their own success, with a simple drone. Can you try to address that?
Yeah, what we're seeing is a major shift in the character of war towards new technologies like drones and commercially available sensors and commercial communication systems being the way that you make kill chains, as opposed to tanks and missiles and government-owned satellites.
So how do we equip ourselves to be the oversight? How help us figure out how to oversee this process? Do you have any ideas, Mr. Gaudette? I mean, we were watching movies like The Terminator. It's here. It's actually almost here. So tell me how we could set ourselves up to be that arbiter or to be that checks and balance.
One thing to do is have hearings like this, and I want to again commend Chairman Grothman for holding this hearing, and you, Congressman Gosar, for being a very active participant in this hearing. We need to have more of them, and they need to be more rigorous, and they need to be more regular. We also need to follow up oversight activities and investigations with actual action. So it's one thing to tell DOD or to tell a misbehaving contractor that they aren't doing the right thing, but unless there are actual penalties or consequences on the other side of those words, I don't think it's going to change behavior very much. So in addition to the examining and overseeing and investigating these issues, we need to also actually push forward some reforms to make these bad outcomes a little bit less bad in the short term, and then try to really change the trajectory of where the Pentagon is going moving forward. I think, I mentioned earlier some reforms around how sort of contract and acquisitions are determined and negotiated at the front end. I think that's a big part of why we're, seeing the things we're seeing, because I don't think anyone's happy. I don't think the people who push for acquisition reform are happy because we're not getting innovation and we're not getting agile and quick and efficient acquisition, but we're also, people like me are not happy either because we're continuing to see a lot of waste and a lot of things like price gouging and overcharging. So we're in the worst of all worlds at the moment. I think Congress does have that role to play, and I think using the power of the purse more frequently is also really important. Obviously, hitting people where it hurts in the wallet is usually the most effective way to catalyze change.
Gotcha. Mr. Clark?
I'd say the most important thing would be for Congress to get involved in making sure that requirements are set so that you get relevant capability, not the absolute best capability, and that you can generate relevant capacity with that level of capability, because we have to do this within a cost constraint. Right. And if the DoD aims for the best that it can get, it's going to necessarily get less, and it's probably going to take longer and cost more. So you got to push for relevant capability and relevant capacity, not just the best.
If there's no further business without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned.